Cybercrime is inevitable, it seems, and it looks very much like the criminals are working hard to defeat security in healthcare. And that's why we at Bridgehead are doing our part and focusing on mitigating the effects of cybercrime. In this edition of the Healthcare Data Matters vlog series, we take a look at how we help one of our customers get back up and running from a serious cyber attack in just 11 days. And that's worth talking about, since the average recovery time is estimated to be 73 days. Public stats around cybercrime are eye-watering, and since we at Bridgehead only focus on healthcare, we have to look at how these stats have an effect on healthcare organisations. Very often, healthcare is described as one of the most vulnerable industry sectors, and partly because of this, a phrase we use almost daily is that it's not an if you become a victim of cybercrime, it's when. Our focus here is on mitigating the effects of cybercrime, reducing those effects, hopefully avoiding ransomware payments, continue to function while you're recovering, and finally, a speedy return to business as usual. It is that last element that I want to talk to you today, the speedy return to business as usual. And we want to look at one of our customers that we worked with in 2023, who suffered a very serious ransomware attack that brought their entire organization to a standstill. The accepted industry figures show that the average time to recover from such a catastrophic event is around 73 days. Some organizations may pay to choose a ransom, for example, but even in these cases, it'll still be days or weeks that you are down while you ensure that the content you now have at your disposal is clinically safe to use. I talked with the product manager here at Bridgehead, Glenn Martin, and we discussed how we were able to get that organization back up and running in just 11 days, and how our post-event review suggested that we could reduce that to just 3. That's a reduction of an outage from 73 days to 3. And since even a small facility will generate revenues of 6 figures a day, a 73-day outage can have a serious effect on the long-term viability of the business. So, Glenn, thank you for joining us this morning. So I think what we need to do is before we get into the meat and the technical discussion of what we achieved here with the customer, can you just go back and briefly describe the scenario? What was the problem, and outline the situation that the customer faced?
Sure, absolutely. So the customer is a mid-sized hospital in the southwest of the US, and put simply, they suffered a serious ransomware attack. So without going into too much of the details, they effectively lost access to a majority of their primary systems. We were alerted pretty early on in the process through our help desk, and the first part of the activity is for the customer to try and determine the scope and scale of the attack. For example, what systems have been affected, and when. So it's really only after this work has been done that we can start to look at an effective recovery plan. Because really then we know what is safe to recover, or perhaps I should say when it's safe to recover from. There's not too much more I can go into specifics about this particular case, but I think anybody that's involved in this area will get the picture, and sadly many of you will only be too familiar with the sequence of such events.
And sadly, sadly that's true, and ever more. I think we're estimating something like 60% of most of our customers are going to be affected by a serious cyber breach at some point. So it really is. It's a when, not an if. So as you say, a problem that a lot of customers will sadly relate to. So we're looking at industry figures that I quoted earlier on of saying it's around 73 days to be back up and running, but we're quoting a figure initially of 11 days. So can you give us an outline of how we help that organization seriously improve the time to recover?
Sure. So I think it's important to state right at the start of this that there are many protection tools and services that can back up and restore applications, database, and other key workloads. And indeed, Bridgehead, we've got our own set of tools which help our customers protect their systems and recover from disasters. So you might say in some respects we're far from unique. However, what does make us unique is how these tools are used, how they're used in a healthcare context. For example, we understand clinical safety, and we understand how to recover entire systems, not just individual servers or applications. For example, your electronic patient record system, or EPR, is a collection of servers and applications, but it's almost certain that multiple vendors are going to be involved, and not everything will be from your EPR vendor. So the way you bring the system back up is critical to ensure you maintain clinical safety. And what do we mean by clinical safety? Well, I'm not a clinician. I don't pretend to be, but what I understand clinical safety to be, at least from my point of view, is that we don't lose data. And if we do lose it, we indicate or show that it's lost. For example, if we have to recover back to a specific point in time, then we have to make sure that all of the systems are recovered to exactly the same point in the past, so that the overall system remains in a consistent state. So what I'm really talking about is an effective healthcare specific data recovery plan. And that's what we gave this customer. It wasn't really just a generic IT service. It was tailored to the business of healthcare. I don't want to go into all of the technology involved, but of course we're doing a point in time recovery. And of course the backup that we're using has got deduplication with on-site copies as well as off-site. And I'll come back to the off-site backup use later and how we can further reduce recovery time. In addition to the planning, it was the testing that was critical. Now, no organisation ever done enough testing, and it's not especially surprising because in order to do the correct testing, you really need to either simulate or have an actual outage or experience the stress of having a real one. At Bridgehead, we've got some of that experience to know if a healthcare recovery plan is likely to be effective, and therefore we can tailor the testing to be more effective.
Yeah, it's the age-old problem, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not going to destroy my data center just for a test. And the big thing you've said there that resonates with me, and I think that we've spoken is this word clinical safety. When we are trying to recover systems, we have to understand that, as you said, the context and clinical safety is always something we run into to make sure that what we hand back is useful to continue treating patients and often be described as life and death. So that then leads us to the question: what did we hand back?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, clinical safety is it's critically important that we hand back the set of data that's safe to use. So a lot of the hard work is in determining the point in time which you can recover every single system. And once that was agreed, it's a relatively straightforward process. And we hand the system back at the point in time that the customer deemed safe. But there was still an amount of work to do in what we call reconciliation, because although the system was down for what we think is a small period of time, it was still 11 days. And in that 11 days, patient care was taking place, records being generated, which needed to be reconciled back into the system to make sure that we had a full history. And that takes time. It's actually a very complicated part of the process, but once you get your full systems back up and running, you can at least start to reconcile back into your standard working system and the patient's records.
So again, this is the idea of system outage. Again, it's another important to reiterate. The systems might be down, but the patients suddenly don't disappear or get better, do they? And it's always the bit that we, to be honest, that's the bit in our experiences. We've talked about our experience, understanding that the hospital still has to function, and there's other other talks we've done on how we help them function during that outage. But that whole reconciliation process is really what defines the recovery process, isn't it? So the headline, we started off 73 to 11, but I said to 3. So that will be music to the ears of a lot of organisations. So we think that we could get this down to 3 days. Do you want to explain to us how we reach that wonderful milestone?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you say, the shorter the period of time, the less complicated the reconciliation is. So I need to go back to something I said previously, and that's testing, and how if we're able to test or simulate a proper outage, then you learn from the experience, and you've got areas of improvement. But as I said, nobody really does this thoroughly enough, because turning your systems off for 11 days is a day, let alone 11 days, is difficult.
Yeah.
There are a few areas where we identified improvements can be made. So the first area was offsite backups. So the bandwidth needed to bring data back, and it's obviously really important to have offsite backups, and we recommend this. It's a vital part of the DR plan. But when the time came to really rely on these, it turned out that the throughput of networks connected to the offsite backups just weren't fast enough. And this meant waiting patiently while the restores continued as fast as the network would allow. In this case, it meant an 11-day recovery period. And I'm probably oversimplifying the solution to the network challenge, but in some respects, it's a case of buying bigger pipes, which in turn may lead to upgrading network infrastructure. But equally, that's all part of the value of having and being able to use the key things there, being able to use offsite backups. But let me just skip past this and think about on-site backups. So having an on-site backup capability, obviously everybody have this, and this would have helped the customer. But the thing to think about in this situation, what if you can't trust the on-site backups? Because the nature of an attack, you really need to be able to trust your backups in a ransomware situation. So these days, you really want your on-site backups to be air-gapped or have immutability capability. So really able to protect your on-site backups, because for malicious actors, it's an obvious target to compromise before setting off the ransomware attack. But then the speed of restore from local storage is always going to be faster than relying on network transfers from the cloud. But you can't always rely on having both options. So make sure you understand the limits of each one, which really goes back to testing and learning from that process. Don't just assume your offline backups or online backups are always going to be fully available. And this is how we can help our customers, by really building this knowledge into their disaster recovery plan, which you might also these days call cyber mitigation plan, because the two things now are so very closely related.
Thanks for that. That is fantastic insight there. So the summary of what we're saying here is that on average, it's going to take you 73. We've proven we can get you down to 11 days, but with better planning and consideration for how your systems need to change for these disasters, particularly, as you said, hardware issues, network issues, then we can reduce that down to a really manageable time. And the obvious follow-on, which we're not going to get into, maybe a different video, is it's now, I think, you're painting a situation where to recover from a cybercrime is far less costly than paying the ransom. And with the assurity that you know what you've got back, and we've helped manage the costs through time of doing that. So 73 to 11 to 3. It's a great story that we're happy to help other customers deal with or achieve. So Glenn, thank you very much. We try and keep these short and brief. Thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jamie.
Even a 3-day outage will have a serious effect on a healthcare business. And of course, a 73-day outage could be disastrous. I think the key takeaway from the presentation that we've just seen is that tools go only so far. What's important is planning. And any organisation that thinks they're immune from cyber attacks will one day be sadly caught out. We talk about what we do here at Bridgehead, and that's helping mitigate the effects of a cybercrime, mitigating the effects of a cyber attack. You will, of course, be using tools that help you avoid cybercrime, and these are vitally important, but one day they will be defeated. And it's important that you start planning for that catastrophic event in the same way as you plan for any other disruption in service. Thanks for watching.